By the time Olivia Ashworth turned 9, the entire 52-story headquarters of Ashworth Capital had learned to move around, her the way sailors learned to move around a storm, carefully, quietly, and always with an eye on the exits. She was the only child of Graham Ashworth, one of the wealthiest men in the state, and in the 2 years since her mother's death, Olivia had become something the household staff, the nannies, the assistants, and even her own father had quietly stopped knowing how to handle. It wasn't that Olivia was cruel exactly, though it often looked that way from the outside. She screamed when things weren't done exactly right. She threw whatever was closest, a tablet, a vase, once memorably an entire bowl of cereal. When someone tried to comfort her the wrong way, at the wrong time, in the wrong tone, she had gone through 11 nannies in 18 months, each one arriving with confident credentials and leaving within weeks, defeated, apologetic, unable to explain exactly what had gone wrong except to say that the girl seemed to be daring them to leave, and eventually, every single one of them did. Graham Ashworth loved his daughter with the desperate, overwhelmed love of a man who had built an empire out of decisiveness and found himself utterly paralyzed by grief he didn't know how to carry, let alone hand down to a 9-year-old. He worked longer hours, not because the company needed him more, but because the penthouse apartment upstairs had become a place too full of his late wife, Elizabeth's absence to sit still in. He brought Olivia to the office some evenings when the nanny situation had once again collapsed, and she would sit in the corner of his glass-walled office coloring furiously, wearing through crayons like she was trying to punish them, while assistants tiptoed past the door. Everyone at Ashworth Capital knew Olivia's tantrums. Everyone, that is, except Daniel Reyes, who had started working the evening custodial shift 8 weeks earlier and had somehow, in that time, managed to remain the only person in the building who had never once seen her lose her temper, because he had never once given her the reaction she was looking for. Daniel was 41, a widower himself, though he rarely spoke of it, raising his own daughter, Maya, alone on a custodian's salary that stretched thinner every year. He had lost his wife Renata to illness 3 years earlier, and had spent those 3 years learning, the hard way, exactly what an 8-year-old's grief looks like when it doesn't have the words to explain itself yet, how it hides inside slammed doors and refused dinners and sudden, inexplicable rage over shoelaces that wouldn't tie right. He had learned not to flinch at Maya's worst moments, because flinching only told a grieving child that their pain was too much, that they were too much, and Daniel had promised himself, standing at Renata's graveside with Maya's small hand gripping his, that he would never make his daughter feel like too much. The first time he encountered Olivia, she was standing in the empty lobby at 8 in the evening, hurling a paper cup of water across the marble floor because her father's assistant had told her gently that it was time to go home, and Olivia had decided, apparently, that she was not ready. The assistant looked mortified, glancing toward the security desk as though hoping someone might materialize to handle this. Daniel simply kept mopping 3 feet away, unhurried. "You're going to want to move," Olivia said sharply, testing him the way she tested everyone, watching for the flinch, the retreat, the appeasement. "I will," Daniel said without looking up from the mop. "Once I finish this section. Floor's slippery when it's wet. Wouldn't want you to fall." Olivia stared at him. Nobody had ever simply continued their task in the middle of one of her outbursts. Usually there was pleading, or stern correction, or the exhausted silence of someone counting down the minutes until they could hand her off to someone else. Daniel did none of that. He finished the section of floor, wrung out the mop, and glanced over at her with an expression that held no fear and no judgment, only a kind of mild, patient curiosity, the way you'd look at weather. "That water's going to leave a sticky spot if nobody wipes it," he said. "Not blaming you. Just letting you know I'll need to get to it eventually." "I don't care." Something shifted in Olivia's expression. "Does she have a mom?" "She did," Daniel said. "Her mom passed a few years back." Olivia went very still. "Mine did too." "I know," Daniel said gently. "I heard." "Does Maya still throw things?" Olivia asked, and there was something almost hopeful in the question, as if she were looking for evidence that she wasn't the only broken thing in the building. "She used to," Daniel said. "Threw a whole plate of spaghetti at our kitchen wall once. About a year after we lost her mom. I didn't yell. I just sat down on the floor next to the mess and asked if she wanted to tell me why she was so angry, or if she just needed me to sit there with her for a while. What did she say? She didn't say anything for 20 minutes, Daniel said. Then she cried for an hour. Then she helped me clean up the spaghetti, and we ordered pizza instead. And it was, if I'm honest, one of the better nights we've had since her mom died. Olivia was quiet for a long time after that, sitting cross-legged on the lobby floor while Daniel finished his rounds, and when her father's assistant finally came to collect her, she went without a single word of protest for the first time in longer than anyone could remember. Over the following months, something began slowly to change. Olivia started arriving at the office earlier, not because her nanny situation demanded it. She had, remarkably, kept the same nanny for 6 full weeks now, but because she wanted to catch Daniel before his shift ended to tell him about her day, to ask more careful questions about Maya, about grief, about whether the ache in her chest would ever get smaller. Daniel never offered easy comfort or empty promises. He told her the truth gently, the way he'd learned to tell it to Maya, that the ache didn't disappear, but it did eventually, learn to sit quietly instead of screaming all the time. If you gave it enough patience and didn't punish yourself for still feeling it. Graham Ashworth noticed the change before he understood its cause. His daughter had stopped destroying Nanny's patience one by one. She laughed sometimes, actual unguarded laughter. In the evenings when he came to collect her. One night, working late, he found her sitting on an overturned supply bucket in the break room, deep in conversation with a man in a gray custodial uniform. And Graham stood in the doorway for a long moment, unnoticed, listening to his daughter talk more openly than she had in 2 years. "Who is that man to my daughter?" Graham asked his head of building services the following morning. And when the answer came back, I'm a janitor. Daniel Reyes, evening shift, widower, one daughter of his own. Graham felt something complicated move through him. Gratitude, and beneath it, a sharp, uncomfortable shame that it had taken a stranger with a mop to reach the child he'd been too broken himself to properly hold. He found Daniel that evening in the supply closet on the 14th floor and, without preamble, thanked him, clumsily, the way men like Graham Ashworth thank people when they aren't used to needing anyone's help. Daniel, uncomfortable with the attention, simply said that Olivia was a good kid carrying something too heavy for a 9-year-old to carry alone, and that anyone would have done the same. Not anyone, Graham said. 11 people tried before you and gave up. They probably weren't trying to survive the exact same thing at home every night, Daniel said. It's easier not to flinch at something you already know the shape of. Graham asked eventually if Daniel and his daughter might join them for dinner sometime, an invitation offered with the particular awkwardness of a man unused to asking for company. Daniel agreed, and the dinner that followed, an unremarkable Tuesday evening, pizza instead of anything the Ashworth chef would have prepared, because Olivia insisted, became the first of many. Maya and Olivia, it turned out, understood each other, in the specific unspoken language of children who have learned grief too young, and became, within a season, something close to sisters. Graham and Daniel became something closer to friends than anyone in either of their circles would have predicted. 2 widowers who had spent years white-knuckling their way through parenthood alone, finally admitting to each other how exhausting the performance of having it together really was. A year after that first evening in the lobby, Olivia stood at her father's office door, no crayons in hand, no storm behind her eyes, and asked if Daniel and Maya could come to her birthday dinner. Graham said of course and asked gently what had changed, why this year felt different from the 2 that came before it. Daniel didn't need me to stop being sad to like me, Olivia said, with the plain, devastating honesty only children manage. He just waited until I was ready to be okay instead of pretending I already was. The office building at Ashworth Capital still ran late most evenings, elevators humming, glass offices lit long after the sun went down. But the 52nd floor no longer emptied out in careful, practiced silence around a grieving girl nobody knew how to reach. Some evenings now, if you walked past the break room, you might find Olivia and Maya doing homework at the same table, Daniel finishing his rounds nearby, Graham stopping in on his way past to ask how everyone's day had gone, and something in that ordinary, unremarkable scene that had taken 2 men, 2 motherless daughters, and one very patient janitor an entire year to finally build.